Hello everyone. So for those of you who have not met me, my name is Louise as a party. Over the last 10 years, I've had the good fortune of being an international award-winning mechanic and helping other tradeswomen to succeed. So during that time, I've discovered that there are 5 essential elements in breaking down the statement, do women need to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good? So they are unconscious bias, self-talk, mental health, self-concept, and sexism. The best part is, once you learn these 5 things, if you're ever in a situation where you feel like you're not good enough, you will be able to adjust the situation, adjust the way that you talk to yourself, so then you do feel like you are good enough. Now there are 2 factors in this statement. The first factor is the internal factor, how we talk to ourselves. The second factor is the external factor, how people treat us and see us in the world. Let me give you some background on my experience. So I'm a heavy vehicle and plant mechanic by trade. I become a trainer and assessor, and now I'm a life coach and mentor for tradeswomen and tradies. So I started my apprenticeship in 2012 when I was 15 years old. I found my apprenticeship at the Brett Carter Apprenticeship at Expos, and in the space of an hour, I had 3 life-changing conversations. The first conversation was short and sharp. I went up to the stand, and they were advertising their apprenticeships there, and they told me straight out, we would not want you to work at our workshop. We wouldn't want our daughters to work here. And later I found out that male apprentices had been sexually assaulted at that workshop. The second conversation was more of a lecture about how I couldn't be a mechanic, how I wouldn't make it, how I was too small to be a mechanic and it wouldn't happen. I was at this expo with my parents, so my dad was next to me while I was having these conversations. I left this conversation really feeling disheartened about what I could do. Remember, at this time I was 15 years old, going through with my parents. The third conversation was a game changer. It was with Sarah. So at the time, Sarah was a first year heavy vehicle mechanic. At the time, she was the same height as me, the same build as me, and at the time, we were both blonde. Changed a few times since then. She encouraged me to do work experience at her work. I did. I loved it. I applied for the apprenticeship and I got it. And then there was TAFE. I think we all remember the first time we walk into TAFE as a female in a male-dominated class. I was wearing my fresh work pants and work shirt. I could hear the sounds of men, boys, laughing and talking. I stepped into the room. Silence. All eyes on me. From the looks on their faces, you could start to imagine what they were thinking. I was thinking, did your parents teach you to shower regularly? I took my seat. The teacher comes in and starts marking names off the list. Luke, Curtis, Adrian. He pauses. Lewis? I raise my hand and say, it's Louise, sir. I ended up having a really good relationship with my TAFE teachers and my TAFE peers. Up until 3rd year, there was an incident that changed the way that I thought about myself. Previously, I had won an award in the 1st year of my TAFE life. And in 3rd year, we were sitting there just after the awards night for 2nd year. And I had gotten another award. I told my TAFE peers. They did not have the reaction that I expected. They started calling out to the teacher, why did she get another award? Did she only get one because she was a girl? Are you just showing her off because she's a girl? This went on for about 10 minutes. I can't remember the outcome of the situation, but I felt awful. Did I really get these opportunities because I was a girl and not because I deserved it? I was head down, arse up working after this, determined to prove that I was good enough. And coincidentally, my anxiety started to peak after this event. I kept working hard. I was put forward to compete in the regional world skills competition. So World Skills is like the Olympics for tradies. It's run in everything from hairdressing to welding to mechanics. It's run in about 60 categories and it's run regionally, nationally and internationally. In 2015, I went into the regional competition with the goal not to come last. I succeeded, I come second. I was then put forward to compete in the nationals and was accepted. This time I was like, nah, none of this come in second bullshit. I'm in it to win it. So I completed 2 TAFE skill sets, plus got a part-time job on the weekend so I could get more experience. I was the first female to compete in the Heavy Vehicle National World Skills competition and I was the first female to win. Then come internationals. We headed into 2017. I was studying, working, training and attempting to have a life. A team of 18 Australian competitors went over to Abu Dhabi to compete. We competed for 4 days. There was blood, sweat and tears. Let's be honest, mostly tears. I come away from the International World Skills competition with 4th place and a medallion of excellence. I literally now had 3 medals in my trade, but guess what? I still felt awful. I was still wondering if I had only gotten this far because I was a girl and not because of my skills. Everyone was saying how proud they were of me, how hard I worked, how far I've come, how well I did. None of it went in. I felt awful. After that, every mistake I made, I beat myself up for. I put so much pressure on myself that I burnt myself out and I had to stop working full time for 4 months. I rested and I ended up returning to work as a trader and assessor. I ended up burning on a smaller scale a few more times. I looked at my career. Some of the times I felt awful, there were people around me making me feel awful. And other times, it was just me in my own head. This is when I realised I was on this cycle. There was a mix of internal and external events that were making me go on this roller coaster of not believing that I was good enough to be in the industry. There is a way to work through these events, and this is what I share with you today. So the first element in understanding and breaking down the statement, do women need to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good, is understanding unconscious bias. What I mean by unconscious bias is people's learned behaviour that they just believe is normal, because that's either what they grew up with, were taught in school, or how society was in their generation. Often it is subtle, something that just doesn't sit right, and when we sit and reflect on it, we decide that something definitely is not right. The reason why understanding unconscious bias is important is because when you understand unconscious bias, you can take directed action to dismantle this unconscious bias. When we come at it with a vague angle, we often get people that are defensive because it can feel like you're attacking their beliefs or their whole personality. So when we go to dismantle unconscious bias, we need to have a direct conversation about it. We've all been in a situation where someone's given us vague feedback and we can't make any change because we have no idea what to change. One of the benefits of understanding unconscious bias is our ability to have conversations that create change. The reason why I tell you this is because unconscious bias has gotten under my skin before and taken my mental energy. And I think some of you may be able to relate to this story. So I rock up at work just like any other day. My mental health at this point is a bit so-so. We get into the work and I can't remember exactly what we were working on, but the component broke as we were putting it in. It happens, right? So I go on, we order the part, and the part's set to arrive later that day. Go and work on another job, and it's just not going to plan, not playing the game. Then the parts guy comes, delivers that part, so we just put that to the side. The guy who delivers our parts is our regular parts guy. He's lovely, but he always tells me how wonderful it is that I'm doing this work as a woman. And today, I just wasn't having it. I was already on a downhill spiral from all the little events that had happened that day. And I took his, how lovely that you're doing this, as maybe as I shouldn't be doing this. And it all got too much, and I went to my favourite cry spot and had a cry. So from situations similar to this that have been happening to me for over the last 10 years, I have learned to have effective conversations that can dismantle this unconscious bias. Step 1 to having effective conversations is to work out their why without asking why. Asking someone why they think a certain way makes them defensive, makes them want to stand up for what they believe in, which when we want to create change, it doesn't work. So in this situation, you can replace the question, why would you say that, with can you tell me more about what led you to think that way? A lot of the times they'll come to the conclusion that it wasn't appropriate to say that on their own terms. You'll need to give them a minute and you'll be able to see their mind clicking through every moment that led them to say that comment. If they don't, you now have further information to then have a more direct conversation with them about that unconscious bias. And you can let them see it from your angle. Now the second element for breaking down and dismantling the statement, do women need to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good, is our self-talk. So what I mean by self-talk is how we talk to ourselves, how we treat ourselves. Are we nice to ourselves? Or do we put ourselves down quickly when we make a mistake? The reason why we talk about unconscious bias before our self-talk is because often we have our own unconscious biases for ourselves. So when we're dismantling our self-talk, we need to get rid of the vision of our own unconscious biases and be aware of them. The reason why our self-talk is so important is because we're often our biggest critic. When someone makes a mistake, we're so often to be nice to them, to talk to them, tell them that it's human to make a mistake and be nice to them. But do you give that grace to yourself? Or when you make a mistake, do you bring up every other mistake that you've ever made until the feeling gets overwhelming and you can't function? Then, because you're thinking of every mistake that you've ever made and you're not concentrating on your work, then you make another mistake and adds to the feeling. We often hear the saying, would you talk to your best friend the way that you talk to yourself? And I don't know about you, but if I talk to people the way I talk to myself, I wouldn't have too many friends. One of the benefits of understanding your self-talk is now breaking the patterns that can bring you down and take your mental energy. Now I want to teach you something about the brain, which I found so fascinating and allowed me to really understand why that I knew logically that I should talk to myself better, but I just couldn't do it in the moment. Now our brain is pretty much a mushy electrical circuit. So what that means is our thoughts are literally electricity going down the path of least resistance, which is what electricity does. So now in our brains, what determines the path of least resistance is how often we think something. So generally, the thing we think most often is beating ourselves up. So that's our path. Let me paint a picture for you. So when we use a path so often, we make it into a highway and it becomes permanent. So now we've got this highway in our brain out of our negative self-talk. So when we try and think of a positive thought, or we know logically we should be speaking to ourselves better, it's like someone standing on the side of a highway with a machete trying to make a new path. So it's a bit hard to see. So when we're in the moment, full of emotion, we often miss that path. So when you first start trying, you're not going to be able to see this path. You're going to have to do a U-turn and keep working at it, chopping away and making a new path. Until that path becomes the path you use most often, and you build a new highway in your brain, and the unused road starts to decay. So now we know how to logically stop beating ourselves up and talking to ourselves negatively. How do we actually do it? I'm going to give you a few tools that you can use and implement to start creating better self-talk so you can have more mental energy. The first tool you can implement is circuit breakers. So a circuit breaker is something you can do when your system starts to get overwhelmed. So you find yourself going down that spiral. All the negative thoughts keep coming and coming. You recognize it, and now you can stop it. This can look like drinking some cold water, focusing on the way that it feels going down. It can look like taking 5 and going to the bathroom, or it can look like writing your negative thoughts down on a piece of paper and ripping it up and throwing it in the bin. Just throw those negative thoughts away. You don't need them. Now the second tool is to start creating a stronger path of positive thoughts. So this can look like a gratitude journal that you practice every day to help build that positive path. Or it can look like thinking of 3 things that you've done really well after you put in your circuit breaker. Now this can take a bit of energy, but it's nothing compared to the energy that negative self-talk can take away from you. The third element to dismantling the statement, do women need to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good, is mental health. Now just before I go into this element, I just wanted to share with you that I will be talking about my own experiences and knowledge on mental health. And just as a warning, my experience does include suicidal thoughts. So what I mean by mental health is 2 things. How you feel you react in different situations, and how they impact you, and how do you feel on a day-to-day. There are 2 main reactions when we talk about mental health. Depression, which can often be described as a low energy state, a numbness to the world, or a no hope feeling. And then there's anxiety. Anxiety is more of a high energy state. It could be nervousness or fear, could be regarding an upcoming event. The 2 feelings can come at many different levels, with the highest level being self-harm or suicide. So the reason why we talk about mental health is because in my experience, my self-talk has had a big impact in a positive way on my mental health. Being aware of how I talk to myself has allowed me to better manage and communicate my mental health needs. The purpose of being aware of your mental health is important because it allows you to have the tools that you need to be mentally healthy. And in this situation where we're discussing sexism and double standards, it can easily tip over and affect our mental health. When we have the tools in place to manage our mental health, we are able to navigate the world, which can sometimes be unkind. We can navigate it safely, both physically and mentally. The benefit of understanding your mental health is you can implement tools that support your lifestyle. Now I want to share with you my journey of mental health. In 2020, I was diagnosed with PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. I had been seeing my GP, counsellors and psychologists on and off for about 5 years at this point. And I would go through cycles where I'd be perfectly fine and then perfectly not fine. I felt I didn't fit into any of the boxes of anxiety or depression, and no one had put me in those boxes. But I would spend a few weeks feeling normal and then a few weeks feeling not normal. Everyone told me I was fine. So in that time when I was feeling not normal, I would be anxious, depressed, have mood swings to the point where I would be suicidal at these times. Everyone told me I was fine. I was high achieving, I could public speak, I was a normal functioning adult. I started to track when these were happening, and I realized it was a few weeks before I got my period that it would hit me. I told this to a doctor. I told the doctor, just before my period, my mental health goes crazy and I pretty much become suicidal. They told me it was just PMS, handed me a brochure, and I would be fine. Trust me, did not feel fine about their response. I went a few more months, and then I went to my local doctor, my normal GP, and told her what I discovered. And this is when we started to discuss premenstrual dysphoric disorder and going on antidepressants. Simply said, premenstrual dysphoric disorder is extreme PMS. Your hormones are normal, but your brain pretty much has an allergic reaction to your normal hormones. Now, as a female in a male-dominated trade, I was trying to deny the fact that my cycle had any effect on my ability to work and act in the workplace, which I believe is part of the fact why it took me so long to put the two and two together, my cycle and my mental health. Even just researching PMDD, finding out more about it, and honestly, finding some memes that made me laugh about it a little bit really allowed me to manage it so much better. Because I have tools in place that help me manage and support my needs. I do things like manage my schedule around my cycle, sleep more when I need it, And also, I know when to push hard on projects and when to hold back a little bit. And I'm also on medication to manage my symptoms. Now I would like to share with you a question that can help you navigate your next steps in your mental health journey. So the question is this a reasonable reaction to this situation? Now let me give you an example of answering this question from my own experience. So the part of my cycle where my mental health goes a bit haywire. If a coworker looked at me in a not super pleasant, happy, smiley way and said hello, my brain would go crazy. I would think I was shit at my job, they thought I shouldn't be here, that I shouldn't be here, that I'm no good, and I would keep saying these things over and over to myself until I pretty much couldn't function. Once I stepped out of the situation, used my circuit breakers, changed my self-talk, I asked myself, is that a reasonable reaction to this situation? I look at the whole picture because sometimes, if you look at someone's on a one-off day and something like this happens, you think nothing of it. But sometimes you have events leading up to this that creates this explosion. But for me, it was just a one-off thing. The guy would be super happy talking to me all the time, and the one time when he was in his own world thinking about whatever class he had to teach, he would miss saying hello to me, and it would send me on this spiral. I decided that that was not a reasonable reaction to that situation. And what I decided to do was go see my GP, ask to get a mental health plan to help navigate that situation that was going on for me. There are many different ways that you can decide that if you're not having a reasonable reaction to a situation, that you can go on. You can call TACS, so the trademark blue collar service. You can call Lifeline, or you can make an appointment to see your local GP to get on a mental health plan. The fourth element in dismantling do women need to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good is your self-concept. So what I mean by self-concept is, what do you believe about yourself? Who are you? What are your values? What are your goals? What position are you in right now, and what position do you want to be in? The reason why, so for example, things that you believe about yourself that are just a fact. So for me, the fact that I have curly hair is just a fact. No one can argue with me about it. I'm not changing my mind. This is also the same kind of belief that I have about myself being a good coach and mentor for tradesmen. It's just the fact that I believe about myself, and no one can change my mind. The reason why we talk about mental health before our self-concept is so we can ensure that we're in the right headspace to make our self-concept. We can make our self-concept whatever we want, but personally, I prefer it to be a mentally healthy version of myself. And if we haven't experienced a mentally healthy version of ourselves, then it can be hard to make the self-concept. Let me give you a few examples of self-concepts. So, a self-concept you can have is the self-concept of being a first-year mechanic. So to me, being a first-year mechanic is you're employed to learn. People know that you don't know too much, you might know the basics, and people expect you to ask questions. You can make these things a fact about yourself. And it might seem a little contradictory, but because you're a first-year mechanic, you believing that you don't know too much allows it to be normal for you to ask questions, allows it to be normal that you don't know. Because trust me, we all know that person who thinks they know everything and they don't, and usually not too many people like them. So if we're not pretending we know things, it leaves us open to the opportunity that we can actually learn new things and learn the things that we don't know. This can be done at any level. So let me give you an example for a fourth year. So a fourth year, they might be 90% independent. They know a lot of things that they didn't know before, and you can still ask questions and get support. You're not pretending to be anything else. So the reason why I use the apprentice example is because so often we are comparing ourselves to someone who has 20 years experience in their industry. 20 years from wherever you're at. That's the person you're usually comparing yourself with. So then it makes it hard to accept making mistakes, to accept the level that you're at, and it causes a lot more pain and anxiety than we need. The purpose of having a strong self-concept is being able to embrace where you are and create a strong base for your next steps. And one of the benefits of having a strong self-concept is that other people's words will just brush off your back. The reason why I share this with you is because as tradeswomen, people can tell us a lot of things. They tell us a lot of good things and a lot of not so good things. And most of the time we feel just like a little ping of annoyance and then we brush it off. You know, we could be having a bad day, like all the parts went wrong parts come in, emergency repair come up, you had to cancel your plans, and then someone says, oh, it's so nice to see a girl doing this. Then you go to your favourite cry spot and have a cry because it all gets too much. Unfortunately, it can sometimes come from other women. I've had a few instances when someone has told me, another woman has told me that I'm actually making things worse for tradesmen. And now this really gets under my skin because the idea of making it worse for tradeswomen just makes me crazy, like I can't handle it. But I know this and it's part of my self-concept. So I know that not everyone is going to like me, and I know that everything that I say is of good intention and no one can take that away from me. I know where the unfollow button is. Sometimes other people, you just need to show other people the unfollow button. There are two main things that you need to know to allow other people's words to just brush off your back. The first one is to know your why. To work out your why, take a look back at why you started, why you get up every day. My why is to help and support tradeswomen. The second thing is to know and accept that not everyone is going to like you, and that's okay. Our body often feels really triggered when someone doesn't like us, because our brain is pretty much our prehistoric brain. So when someone doesn't like us, it thinks we're going to get kicked out of the tribe and eaten by a tiger. So we need to remind ourselves that we are going to be physically safe if someone doesn't like us. So the fifth element in dismantling the statement, do women need to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good, is sexism. So what I mean by sexism is when someone is very obviously treating you differently because you're a woman. And yes, this does work both ways, but right now I'm going to be talking about my experience as a female in a male-dominated trade. Outright sexism is getting less and less in the world, but it still exists. There are different levels, from people simply saying, I don't think women can do this, or I won't employ you because you're a woman, to the situation that we see happening in Afghanistan, which really pains my heart for those women to see it existing in the world like that these days. The reason why we talk about self-concept before we talk about sexism is because when we believe that we belong, we will not tolerate anything that goes against us. We will be able to find the words and the confidence to stand up for ourselves in any situation, and also stand up for others. So the purpose of understanding sexism is so we can understand what tools we need to create change. And yes, outright sexism is different to unconscious bias, because sexism is a form of conscious bias, where 90% of the times people actively know what they are doing and the effect they intend to have on you. One of the benefits of understanding sexism is knowing when enough is enough. One of my experiences with outright sexism had a few layers to it. I had an amazing boss, and we would go out and work on other sites and work on their machines on site. My boss, unfortunately, was diagnosed with cancer, and he was going through the process of chemo, doing treatment. So he sent us to work on this particular site pretty much full time. That meant he had less to worry about while he was going through his treatment. But that particular site had an outright sexist manager and outright sexist second in charge. And they weren't just sexist, they were awful to the other employees as well, to the men. But it was different for me. They would write things on the whiteboard, like women's rights here and draw a little circle, and men's rights everywhere else. They would say things on the daily like, Louise, clean up, you're the woman. One time my boss had come to check on us, and the owner of the site said one of these comments in front of him. My boss said, no, he can clean up, everyone can clean up after themselves. But unfortunately, because of the cancer treatment, my boss did not come around too often. I had been putting up with this for a while because of the situation. But enough become enough. I had to tell my boss that I couldn't work there anymore. Some ways to work out when enough is to have the first confronting conversation. This gives them the ability if they can change, or if they can change, they can. So for example, yesterday when you said, clean up Louise, you're the woman, I felt that it wasn't appropriate because we're supposed to be a team of technicians working together and we can help each other with the cleaning. Next time, could you please share the load with everyone? Now, what you can do is give them some time to see if they take on the feedback. And if they don't, you can make the decision on whether to take it to HR, if there's a HR in the business, or if it's time to leave. Sometimes enough is enough. Unfortunately for me, my situation, I had that exact conversation and it actually got them to be more, because they saw that it was getting a reaction out of me and they thought that was the best thing in the world. So enough was enough with that situation. So these 5 elements, unconscious bias, self-talk, mental health, self-concept, and sexism can affect how we think, feel, and act in different situations. They're not the only things that affect the statement, do women need to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good? But in my experience, they have a really big impact on the way that I move through the world and the way that I can create change around me. This is what has led me to being a life coach and mentor for tradeswomen and tradespeople, to support them in navigating these steps. I remember when Laura came to me. She was feeling overwhelmed. She was returning to work part-time as an electrician, and she had a lot of thoughts about what returning to work as a tradie, as the main carer for her children was. She was stressed and overwhelmed. We worked through the facts. What were people telling her, and what was she telling herself about the situation? We unpacked this and put actions in place to create better self-talk and to stand up and have the conversations that she needed to have, which has led her to being happy and confident in the workplace and at home. Thank you, everyone. So if you have any questions or comments, you can ask, or I'll be around at the expo today. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay. Oh yeah?
Hi Louise, thank you. That was very insightful and a great share. Can you tell us about what you feel now? How do you feel now, and how do you handle your position as a coach? Do you live into everything that you?
I would say I'm pretty 90% on what I preach. Unfortunately, like, a guy can say anything to me that he wants, and I can brush it off my back. But still, unfortunately, when other women say negative things to me, it gets under my skin a little bit. But I'm pretty easy to process that and move on from it as well.
It's great to hear.
Any other questions? Alright, so there's some flyers on the chairs, and if you're standing at the back and you wanted a flyer about what I do, just come up and I'll give you one. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming along and listening to my session.